So I'm doing a video on somebody I haven't spoken about for some time, and it's an individual that when I do speak about her, it does come with a little bit of backlash, but I'm going to explain that towards the end of the video. And we're actually looking at Erin Stern, the ultimate glute workout, no hip thrust needed. Because there are a few points throughout this video that I saw, I want to just give my opinion on, maybe even correct, and also just provide some information that might actually better help you when it comes to your glute development. And I know you're thinking, Harry, why are you, a random man online, speaking about the bottom of a pro bodybuilder? Just because somebody looks a certain way, or just because somebody has achieved a lot within a given sport or discipline, doesn't necessarily mean they know everything. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're always right, and we're going to get to that shortly. Very quickly, if you do learn anything from this video, or even just agree with any of my opinions, I would very much appreciate it if you did subscribe to the channel, and maybe even like the video too, as it does help a lot.
Seem to be two schools of thought with building beautiful glutes.
I wish somebody would refer to my bottom as beautiful.
One is the squat, deadlift, RDL, compound lifts all day, every day to build glutes. Don't do hip thrusts. The other school of thought is hip thrusts, tons of volume, and this is really the way to build glutes.
But what if there was a third way that was arguably even better than both of the methods presented already?
Anytime we're training a muscle in the lengthened position, it is going to increase the amount of muscle damage to that muscle, controlled muscle damage. So we're doing it on purpose. But you'll need a little bit more time in between sessions. So the workout we're doing today is great if you do it once or twice a week.
Yes, valid. Length and position dominant movements do typically result in more muscle damage, which does typically result in slower recovery time. But would it not make sense, especially when considering bringing up a lagging body part in which you probably want to train as frequently as possible, to then find a selection of movements and also train in positions that allow you to train said lagging body part maybe more than once or twice a week, but instead 2 to 3 times per week.
The extra range of motion comes in by going below parallel with the upper leg. You're going to get an additional stretch here. You're going to activate the glutes more here. This is going to lead to more gains over time.
It's an interesting one because firstly, I dislike this machine. I think it's largely crap. This way is actually arguably probably better than its intended purpose, which is flipped around. And again, it falls into the common belief so many people do have, which is if a movement takes a muscle through a larger range of motion, it must mean it's a better movement. But that's not true. Arguably, I'd say the hip thrust is probably one of the best movements you can do for the glutes, but the range of motion is actually relatively short. It's nowhere near comparable to the range of motion we're seeing here, which is much greater. But I still favor the hip thrust over this movement when it comes to glute development. So again, more doesn't necessarily mean better, and that was a common thing that came up in the chest video I did last week, speaking about the fly. Deeper stretch, more range of motion, and then people present the argument of, oh, stretch mediated hypertrophy, but that's not applicable to every muscle. The lack of back support here is another consideration, in which case your lower back is probably going to fatigue very quickly, which then presents an external limiter that can greatly hinder or reduce the effectiveness of the movement and take emphasis away from the target musculature, meaning you're shifting more emphasis to your lower back than you are your glutes, which is not ideal when you're considering training your glutes. In fairness, the Smith machine good morning is actually a fine movement. I think whether you choose a good morning or an RDL is completely up to you. My preference is I prefer the RDL. That is purely because of preference. It doesn't mean it's better or worse than the good morning. It's just what I prefer because it feels better for me. But the good morning is absolutely fine as a hinge variation. Again, length and position dominant. And the key thing here, like with the RDL, is drive your hips back. If your hips can no longer travel backwards, your range of motion is probably done. And more range of motion doesn't necessarily mean better. In this case, I'd say it's more relevant to range of motion that should be considered, which again, looks at whether your hips are still traveling back or if you're just going up and down, in which case your lower back is likely to take you over a lot, which we want to avoid. As always, the link down below is the link to the TFNL coaching application where you can apply online to work with myself on a one-to-one online coaching basis where I can help you achieve your goals, whatever they may be and wherever you may be in the world. All you do, fill in the application form, takes 2 minutes. I'll drop you an email. I'll give you some more information. We'll hop on a Zoom call, waffle about some life and some things, and then you can go away, think about it and decide whether it's right for you. No pressure if not. And if it is, we're bloody flying. Again, as always, a link down below in the description and also the comment section too.
The final one, we're moving into the goblet squat with a pulse. Now here, I want you to give me 8 to 10 pulses at that mid-rep point.
But why? Firstly, 8 to 10 reps doesn't mean anything if intensity isn't there. Proximity to failure is arguably going to be more important than rep range. Rep range should be used as a guidance or a target, but not a limit. you should be working to your intended intensity goal, which is usually anywhere from, let's say, 0 to 2 reps in reserve. But second thing, the goblet squat is just a pretty pants movement in my opinion. Again, we're looking at what's going to fail first. Are your glutes going to fail first? And please, before you answer that, consider how strong the glutes are as a muscle group, or external limiters like potentially your shoulders from holding the dumbbell, or maybe even your core. Are they going to fail first? For my case, if I'm using a goblet squat, I'm probably going to have to hold multiple hundreds of pounds, in which case my shoulders, maybe even my arms, or my core will likely fail before my glutes do, because again, the glutes are exceptionally strong as a muscle group, and immediately, if that is a case where you're being limited by an external variable, you are simply reducing the effectiveness of this movement, and it's no longer as stimulating for the glutes as you would like it to be, therefore, a pretty pants movement. When I disagree with Erin, or provide an opinion that doesn't align with hers, people will first go to, how dare you critique a former pro bodybuilder or a Miss Olympia, whatever it may be. What have you achieved in bodybuilding? Less than her. But does that mean I'm wrong? And just because she's got a title, does that mean she's right? Because if that were true, we should only really consider what the Olympia competitors, or Olympia winners in this case, actually preach when it comes to training. And a lot of their training methodologies are pretty pants. Just because somebody is big or has achieved a lot doesn't necessarily mean they know exactly what they're talking about. And this is the concept of appealing to authority. Looking at somebody's achievements or somebody's title and say, you know what? They must know loads. We know when it comes to training, goals are probably more relevant than gender. What you should really do if you're looking at building muscle is ignore everything we're both saying and then just listen to whatever the arguably best bodybuilder of all time is saying, which is probably going to be Ronnie Coleman. Just because he's achieved incredible things doesn't necessarily mean he trained the perfect way or is optimal or whatever it may be, and doesn't necessarily mean he may not be wrong. Oftentimes people ignore the whole concept of genetics, which is something you need to consider. I've seen some people with incredible physiques just do things that are categorically wrong, and you'd look at that and be like, wow, I can't believe they're doing that. But they look better than you and I, so by default and by the logic that's often presented in the comment section, they must know what they're talking about. But we know that's not the case. So there's value or merit in learning not to appeal to authority and actually just questioning whatever you're hearing online, and maybe even doing your own research to gauge whether it's an opinion that you align with or not. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong in this case, I'm simply saying go away, formulate your own opinion based on your own understanding and research before then deciding which you better align with.
Moving on to the cable reverse pull through. This is going to give you a different angle than the good morning, but it's another hinge exercise.
Doing a pull-through variation in 2025 is menacing behavior. To be frank, if I were to do a pull-through, the amount of weight I would have to utilize to make it even remotely effective in some capacity would probably end up yeeting me across the room into the upside down. Stability is massively challenged here, and despite what many people believe, we don't want that. We want more stable movements when looking at purely maximizing hypertrophy, which keeps as much stimulus and emphasis on the target musculature rather than it being potentially limited by an external variable, in this case stability. We don't want it to be limited. We want to fail because the muscle has failed and not because something else is preventing us from taking that muscle to failure. A glute med leg raise, kickback, or machine abduction, absolutely fine. I don't really have massive dramas with this movement. Ultimately, the glute med is a muscle of the glutes that's commonly neglected. I've mentioned this 1,000 times before. Whether you do this, a glute med kickback, or a machine abduction is completely up to you. It really comes down to preference. But either way, I would say it's probably important to include for a lot of people because that muscle is typically neglected and it does help with that kind of upper glute shelf. When it comes to glute training, I really do simplify. I know this whole video was intended with the no hip thrust needed, but I do think there's a lot of merit including a hip thrust variation if you can. It can be the hip thrust, it can be a glute bridge, or maybe even a 45-degree back extension glute bias with a slight knee bend. Any of those movements is absolutely fine. Pair that with a hinge pattern like an RDL, pair that with maybe a unilateral pattern like a unilateral leg press, or maybe even if you want to a split squat with support and a glute med kickback or machine abduction. You've got 4 absolutely cracking movements there, and then all you have to do is take those 4 movements and find variations of them to then have another almost selection of more cracking movements you can choose from. But if I were you, I'd probably stay away from the fancy looking squat machines because they're not as good as you think they are, despite them looking pretty cool. And I probably would stick to the basics. Hinge pattern, hip thrust pattern, unilateral pattern, and abduction pattern. Just because I don't necessarily agree with everything that Erin is saying here doesn't mean she's wrong and I'm right. It's simply me presenting an opinion based on my understanding, my research, my experience, which clearly contradicts hers. But again, maybe there's more than one way to achieve a result, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a matter of she's achieved more than you, clearly she must be better or must know more, because again, that is a very, very poor argument that heavily aligns with the whole appealing to authority issue, which doesn't really get you very far when it comes to critical thinking, which is in turn only going to hold back your education and maybe even your results and progression too. Just food for thought. But regardless, I'd love to hear your opinions in the comment section below. And until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle once again about the bottom, and thank you for tolerating the video.